Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Poisoner's Almanac. I'm your co-host, Adam.
I'm Rebecca.
How you doing, sweetie?
I'm all right. I'm tired, but it's kind of my own fault. I'm staying up too late,
I'm tired, but it's kind of my own fault.
It is my own fault. I recognize when things are my own fault.
That could go on a t-shirt.
I feel like, as you get older, and especially if you have kids, you don't get time to yourself, and so you kind of make time for yourself, but then you kind of regret it because the next day you didn't sleep and you're tired.
It's revenge procrastination.
I feel like I've been doing that ever since I was a kid, though. So.
That's right. Let's jump into housekeeping real quick for the old podcast before we move on. Be sure to follow us or subscribe or whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks in advance for leaving 5-star reviews on a platform like Spotify. Follow us on the socials, links in the show notes. The Patreon is up and running. We've recently made some changes to the Patreon.
Yeah, there's an update on there though. So
yeah, we made a separate video episode for the podcast, separate episode for the podcast explaining those new changes. Yeah. When you support us financially on a monthly basis, you get weekly bonus episodes. You can leave us a voicemail that we listen to here on the podcast, and you get shouted out by name. You also get access to the private podcast Discord, where all the cool kids hang out. And let's shout everybody out. They are the following: 87, Pens Girl 71, Mara Santiago, Grace Lahan, Genevieve, Nahev Shetrit, Jay Wentz, Inken Hafner, Kiri Yorsek, Tay of Sunshine, Monique, Sue Steves, Megan Geiler, Liz B, Willie Wolf NZ, Nicole Rivers, Richard Miyako, Sasha Rubel, Maya Shostak, Maggie Yarm, Ogre the Viking, Lynn Rocket, Brett Moser, Zaid, Neil Houdini, Nicole Crane, Jefferson Vargas, Carmen Q, Sarah G, Ninja, Estar, Olive Octopus, Betsy Rich, T-Bug, Christine Muljadi, Morgan Brittingham, Blau Frosch, a.k.a. Clara Jurisons, Vix, Anne Maria Clyde, Jennifer Wilson Richter, Too Fidgety, Wendy G, Elena MK, Caitlin Martin, Pungram 101, Minnesota SPT, Tasha, Stuart Slattery, Simone Valdez, Christian Schradergaard, Bonnie, Omadi, Rynell Alara, Kristen Arnold, Aaron Carey, Lynn Simpson, Melissa Emmel, Desiree Davis, Jennifer Ramirez Johnson, Dalek Party, The Warped Witch, Dizzy Dancer, Creative Otter, Yadmit, Supergirl Sway, Rachel, Anya Brandt, Ebby, Leah Marie Matson, Lady Digitalis, Jesse, Shay 10, Julia Franzoni, Sparks, Gloria Eichmann, Thomas Huff, From Strange to Things, Soy Kasumi, Jessica Gasparini, Caitlin and Donna Lanchanese, Lauren Smith, Anna G, Serpentine Fire, Melanie the SLP, Stuart Lee, Chris Millanak, Mackenzie Kennedy, Libby, Hetty, Hantapalooza, J Moon, Kelsey H, Paper Sky, Hannah Cook, Nikki Larkin, Campazar, Rawr, Britt Clark, Paris Longer, Andrea Shameless Agitator, Ruby Salazar, Cassandra Smiles, Daniel Soar, Jasmine, Kapow 73, Dr. Doom, Maureen Hart, Justin Higgins, Nigel Hawkins, Judy Lowe, Nissa 16, Seamus Picked, Lisa DW, Jesse Pollard, Sarah, Jahira, Everyday Delirium, Cody Griffith, April, Alicia, Meli Fantastico, Panda Cannoli, Amber Golder, Donna Foley, Michelle Cornett, James Mills. Oh, James Mills is in there twice. I just realized. Whatever.
Double fun.
Enjoy being double shouted out, James. Teethweir5. I still don't know how to say that username. And last but not least, Tansi. Thank you all for supporting on Patreon.
Cool.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
I think it's Hiroshima.
Hiroshima. Yeah, that sounds like the Japanese pronunciation.
Yeah.
Native Japanese speaker would say it that
people do say it differently. I've heard it both, Hiroshima and Hiroshima. So
I learned so much about pronouncing Japanese names or places from a Major League Baseball player who played for the Boston Red Sox named Daisuke Matsuzaka. But his first name looks like Daisuke. You think, phonetically speaking, for Americans, we want to say, oh, Daisuke, but the actual pronunciation is Daisuke.
Isn't there like a brand that's like Daisuke?
I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe I could be completely off.
So literally, like on social media, you would see people type out the word dice, D-I-C-E, and then -K, because that's actually how you pronounce his first name, Daisuke Matsuzaka.
Yeah, I could be making up the whole brand thing. That's going to bother me. But I'll, if it'll come to me, it comes to me, whatever. But yes, we are talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, finally getting to the atomic weapons and the end of the war on that side of things. So yeah, it's time to talk about the end of World War II on Japan's side, which means we got to discuss those bombings. We know about Japan's Unit 731 and their attack on Pearl Harbor and Hawaii. We've talked about quite a bit of that. If you've been with us on bonus episodes, you've also heard me discuss the Manhattan Project. We've talked about internment camps here as well. We've talked about nuclear testing that was done, as well as some long-term issues after the fact. But the Manhattan Project, for those who don't know, I'm not going to go into it in a whole lot of detail, just kind of letting you know what it was, why it's important here. Basically, the U.S. government's secret program to produce nuclear weapons with help from the U.K. and Canada. There were a lot of physicists you may know who were a big part of the project, like Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, Richard Feynman, Hans Bethe, Glenn Seaborg, Edward Teller, Ernest Lawrence, and John von Neumann. There's more too, but these are just some familiar names, I feel like, especially if you like science a lot, you're into this kind of thing, or maybe you've watched Big Bang Theory. I know they reference quite a few of these names on there too. I mean, Oppenheimer has his own movie, for goodness sake, now. But yes, Oppenheimer, of course, has been known as the father of the atomic bomb. So we're going to mention some other names later that are also familiar but who were German scientists, because they come into play a little bit later, at least in opinions that we talk about later. So basically the race was on to be the first to have such a weapon, because if you did, you could have it as this sort of defense against enemies choosing to attack you. Kind of a weird, twisted way of looking at it, I guess, but that's just how it was. So what was going on. They don't want that kind of smoke, basically. Like, if we attack, they could just nuke us. But at the same time, people were like, well, if they nuke us, we'll just nuke them. And I'm like, so we're just going to burn the world down. Cool.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Basically.
Reminds me of Michael Caine's monologue from The Dark Knight. But in 6 months, we never met anybody who traded with him. One day, I saw a child playing with a ruby the size of a tangerine. The bandit had been throwing him away. Sorry. It's one of my favorites ever.
You can
would you like some more?
They do like don't hit us or we'll hit you. But I feel like if you're talking to leaders of a country who don't really care that much about their own people and only want like certain things, eventually that's just not going to matter. I don't know.
And now that's America.
I don't know. Like, it just feels like this is probably not the best way for going about our problems, just
it's the collision between the depravity of man and the ability to absolutely annihilate ourselves.
Yeah. And there's a big debate on, we're going to talk about obviously towards the end here, on whether people agreed with or didn't agree with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we'll mention that too. Okay. Yeah. So the U.S. was not the only nation working on creating such a weapon. Russia, Germany, Japan had also done research on the matter as well. The UK was actually farther along with their understanding of nuclear weapons. We were, but decided to collaborate with America because of limited resources resulting from the war. They'd been in it for a while at this point. So, But the first nuclear explosion was detonated July 14th, 1945 at the Alamogordo bombing range, 210 miles south of Los Alamos, New Mexico. And this was to test a plutonium implosion device and involved the Manhattan Project plus the U.S. Army. We talk more about that about that test in the recent bonus episode. So let's just carry on from there.
You've never seen Oppenheimer, have you?
I haven't. I know it's Cillian Murphy.
It is. And it's also another Christopher Nolan movie, by the way.
I don't like Christopher Nolan. I just don't like. I don't know why.
Well, that's you. It's okay for you to be wrong. That's okay.
I just don't like his stuff. I know. It's just not me. I do like the actor though that plays him, and I like
Cillian Murphy's great.
So there were obviously 2 bombs involved in the attack on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. One was named Little Boy, was made using enriched uranium. The other was named Fat Man and was of the plutonium implosion type. Now, Little Boy had a complex design. It involved a gun-type method of detonation. Now, the easiest way to explain how that worked is by kind of having you imagine this uranium bullet being shot from one end of the bomb on the inside by some explosive, which in this case they used these cordite charges at the right time. And then basically this bullet has a hollow front. So the hollow front uranium bullet would be shot forward, and it would collide with a cylindrical target so that the hollow front of this bullet would slide over a uranium rod. while it did so. It just fit into place. And this would lead to a chain reaction, critical mass, fission, big boom, right? So there was a timer added to ensure that the bomb would not explode until at least 15 seconds after release, a quarter of the predicted fall time, to ensure the safety of the aircraft. And this timer was activated when the electrical pull-out plugs connecting it to the airplane pulled loose as the bomb fell. So pretty good. At least it had some safety stuff added to it. When we talk about the actual bombings, though, it's not gonna feel very safe. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'd feel very safe anyway if I had these giant nukes in the same plane as me, but here we are. So the timer was activated when those were pulled loose, and it would switch to its internal 24-volt battery, which would start the timer. And now at the end of 15 seconds, the bomb would be 3,600 feet, about 1,100 meters from the aircraft, and the radar altimeters were powered up, and responsibility was then passed to the barometric stage. So it would kind of go from the timer to this sort of like feeling pressure and deciding when to go off based on that. So Fat Man was also called Mark III, but I doubt as many people know it by that name. It was an implosion type nuclear bomb, like that one detonated at the test site in New Mexico, the Trinity site, if you will. So the Little Boy was a uranium gun type bomb. This one, Fat Man, is a plutonium implosion type bomb. So they were different. It basically held a solid core of plutonium, and this one ended up being significantly more efficient in terms of explosive yield per unit mass of fissile material in the bomb, because compressed fissile materials react more rapidly and so more completely. The gun type nuclear weapon was favored when it came to research just because there were less uncertainties around that design. Still, some were appointed to look into the implosion type bombs as a possibility. So you had both being made. Now, it was found that the implosion bomb would have to use enriched plutonium with the least impurities possible, and that the gun type would not allow for easy or safe use of plutonium due to how unstable it could be. So that's why you had uranium used in this one and plutonium used in over here. Okay, now pre-detonation was kind of the main worry with some of that. With Fat Man, detonation began with compression of this plutonium core via surrounding explosive. Like these little lenses would explode, sort of pushing it all inward. So it would cause this implosion, which is why it's called an implosion bomb, due to that inward pressure. Within the center was this, what they called an urchin, or the neuron initiator. So the implosion led to the crushing of this urchin, as they called it. It would release free neutrons, which would lead or hasten this chain reaction or critical states. It was just adding to it. The Little Boy and Fat Man were given their names by Robert Serber, who was a physicist working on the Manhattan Project, and he was also a former student of Oppenheimer's. Before these, the design was the Thin Man. That's what they called it at first. This was supposed to be a gun-type plutonium bomb that just didn't work out. This name came from a detective series, like books and movies, with the same name by Dashiell Hammett. The gun-type bomb later became known as Little Boy to play off that name when the design changed and uranium was used for it. So now Fat Man was named because of its shape and after a character from Hammett's Maltese Falcon, played by Sidney Greenstreet. And like, if you look at the pictures of the bombs, Little Boy is it feels like it's more cylindrical. Fat Man does have like this, width to it. So the coded project actually was kept secret when they were building these two, and it would be helped along in calls referencing the bombs as their code names and using the code names as in reference to like President Roosevelt, Thin Man, and Winston Churchill, Fat Man. That's just what they went with. But basically, there was this whole ruse of them going on some secret tour of the U.S. using a special plane that was being designed. So that was like they were just trying to throw people off of what they were doing using coded language. So, in fact, there was no such plane or tour. It was all just a ruse. So Little Boy weighed 9,700 pounds, which is about 4,400 kilograms. It was 120 inches, about 300 centimeters in length, 28 inches, 71 centimeters in diameter. It was not tested like the implosion type bomb, which was used on Nagasaki. So there were only estimates as to the power this bomb would yield. Now, some believed that it would be about 5,000 to 15,000 tons of TNT, be about that powerful. Now, this was the bomb that was dropped over Hiroshima. According to Parsons' observations, as he was part of this drop, he said it was larger. It was a larger blast than he had seen at the Trinity test, which he had been a part of. The yield was closer to 15,000 to 20,000 kilotons. Kind of different from tons to kilotons.
Good Lord.
You know what I mean? A 1985 study estimated the bomb's yield was around 15 kilotons of TNT. Now, I mentioned that the implosion bomb was more efficient in how much of the fissile materials reacted. This weapon used on Hiroshima contained 64 kilograms, about 141 pounds of uranium. That's a lot. But
Wow.
yeah. But less than a kilogram underwent nuclear fission. So all that was in there, but only like less than one underwent nuclear fission, which makes you think, like, considering how destructive it was, like, that was just 1 kilogram of that material.
That's like 10% of the actual payload.
So,
why? It wasn't designed to do that, though, right?
It wasn't. It had not been tested, though. This was kind of a. They were just, honestly, this was their test, using it on Hiroshima. In a way, if you could think about it that way. Yeah. So they really didn't. I think they didn't want to test it because they didn't want to use up uranium for further, which they continued to make bombs, but I think they went with the plutonium-based bomb after that.
Yeah, it's a tough time to mine rare earth elements.
And now uranium is used in the, like, with decay and creation of plutonium sometimes. So it's, But yeah, they didn't want to use it up. So they were like, well, let's just see what happens. We don't think we do.
We're American. Like a golden fleece.
Oh my gosh, I need to rewatch that movie.
Bill Hader,
don't you touch that yet. So yeah, only less than a kilogram underwent nuclear fission. Now, this seems stupid to say outside of the numbers side of things because it destroyed Hiroshima and it killed approximately It killed approximately 140,000 men, women, and children that were there at the time and some months after. For several months prior to the atomic bombings, the U.S. did warn about potential air raids by dropping more than 63 million leaflets across Japan. I've heard some people use this fact as a sort of, see, we were so nice because we warned them and didn't want to hurt innocents, and it's their fault if they stayed. Blah, 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 sort of defense for dropping atomic bombs. In reality, these leaflets were not dropped with the purpose of saving anyone at all, and none actually mentioned the coming of something as powerful as the atomic bombs. Those were completely a secret. Many Japanese cities had already suffered terrible damage from aerial bombings. Some were as much as 97% destroyed at this point. It was thought that leaflets would increase the psychological impact of bombing and reduce the international stigma of area bombing cities. So it was really actually done with more selfish,
so intense
intent. Now, the Japanese regarded the leaflet messages as truthful, with many Japanese choosing to leave major cities. And some of these leaflets, like, they did hit some of these places, but they weren't always accurate. They were just, I guess, dropping these things to worsen the threat, But leaflets were actually prepared by recent Japanese prisoners of war because they were thought to be the best choice to appeal to their compatriots. So basically, like, America was having Japanese prisoners of war write these leaflets to be dropped over.
Okay.
Also, Hiroshima was not mentioned as any sort of target for attack on those leaflets anyway. So now, before the bombings, some scientists that were working on the Manhattan Project suggested a demonstration of the bomb in an uninhabited part of Japan to intimidate the leaders into surrendering instead of outright killing hundreds of thousands of people. Like, they brought the idea to the president, to the highest point of the government, really, to his whole crew, his cabinet, whatever. This idea was rejected, however, because those higher up wanted to maximize the shock value of the attack, not just warn them. Because they thought, if we don't do something drastic, then they may not surrender, and we don't want to give away how shocking this can be. We want them to feel it on impact.
Yeah.
No. Hiroshima was a center of military importance for Japan at the time. It was headquarters for a number of troops and units defending the south of Japan. It was also a city of industry, providing equipment, supplies, weapons, etc. It was a port city with ships, and it had communications centers between military forces. In total, an estimated 40,000 Japanese military personnel were stationed in the city, and it was a base, strong in areas of supply and logistics. Now, the population of Hiroshima had reached a peak of over 381,000 earlier in the war, but prior to the atomic bombing, the population had steadily decreased because of evacuation orders given by the Japanese government. But at the time that the atomic bomb was dropped, the population was still around 340,000 to 350,000 people. Most lived in typical homes made of timber with tile roofs, and this was the makeup for most local workplaces and industrial sites as well. There were some newer buildings in the center of the city that were constructed of reinforced concrete. The city did have family homes, farms, shops, restaurants, schools, temples, and other typical town features alongside military forces and sites. Many of the civilians living there, including children, were often made to do jobs for the military along with their normal work or school. They called it how do they call it? It's like they would have duties to help with these different jobs while they were still in school, kind of like these
work release,
sort of
work study,
but with school, prison. Although it might have felt like prison because sometimes school can feel like that. But they call it mobilized, I think, students or something like that. So they would go here and there, be out and about in between their normal classes and stuff like that too. Now, many there worshipped the emperor as the rest of Imperial Japan were taught to do, though there were also Shinto shrines, Buddhist monks. There were also about 13 Christian churches there as well. And just like Americans were given propaganda about the Japanese, in other nations, the Japanese people were taught at the same time that Americans would capture, rape, pillage, and brutally murder them if they won or invaded. This is what their people were telling them. Their leaders were telling them this. Some even said that they were taught that Americans would eat them. So
they're eating the dogs.
I mean, now Americans were sending Japanese men, women, and children to internment camps in the U.S., which was wrong in every way you look at it. And they were actually deporting Asian people who were actually born in America back to some of these destroyed cities as well. Like they would have been born in America, but still sent back to these places they'd never been, but then they were also destroyed. And sounds familiar, but and it wouldn't have even have just been Japanese Americans. It could also have been Korean or Chinese as well. So, yeah. Now, Hiroshima was selected as an official atomic bomb target in April of 1945 and was kept safe from other kinds of air bombings so the site could provide accurate data of destruction to those interested to see basically what happened, right? It was an attack, but also an experiment. Now, August 6th, 1945, the Enola Gay, named for its pilot's mother, if you needed to know. It was a B-29 from the 393rd Bombardment Squadron. It took off early that morning around 2:45 from Tinian Northfield, just about a 6-hour flight away from Japan. This is like their time, 2:45. So it was joined by 2 other aircraft, the Great Artiste, commanded by Charles Sweeney for carrying instrumentation for blast measurement, and another later named Necessary Evil, commanded by Captain George Marquardt.
What a vibe.
But this one was actually there to photograph the incident as it occurred. And I do need to mention that, ironically, Necessary Evil did not, the photography, the cameras on the plane didn't actually even work at the time. Something happened to them that didn't work. But somebody had actually gotten photographs later with a camera they had snuck on board. They weren't supposed to bring it with them, but they did anyway. So there's that. There were other planes involved for weather reconnaissance as well in that area and surrounding areas. Another plane flying in formation with the Enola Gay dropped parachuted sensors for measuring. So it was like, we're just going to drop these so that we can measure what we're about to do to you. William Parsons, who I mentioned a little bit earlier, he's the weaponeer on the Enola Gay. He was responsible for the bomb itself. It was a pretty complex arming system, especially because Parsons was worried that it would detonate if there was an accident on takeoff, which was unfortunately kind of common at the time. Not the, accidental detonation of atom bombs on runways, but accidents with planes on takeoff. Mm-hmm. So it was armed mid-flight. After takeoff, the 4 cordite powder bags were actually loaded into the gun breech of the bomb. Parsons and his assistant, Second Lieutenant Morris R. Jepson, made their way into the bomb bay along the narrow catwalk on the port side. Jepson held a flashlight while Parsons disconnected the primer wires, removed the breech plug, inserted the powder bags, replaced the breech plug, and reconnected the wires. They better be glad I am not in the military. I'd be like, crap, I forgot what I was supposed to do.
What did I come in here for?
Wait, does this wire go to here? Okay. So, yeah, before climbing to altitude on approach to the target, Jepson switched the 3 safety plugs between the electrical connectors of the internal battery and the firing mechanism from green to red. So it was basically turned on mid-flight as they approached. Complex kind of system here. The bomb was dropped at approximately 8:15. This is Japanese Standard Time. Is that JST? On the 6th of August, 1945, so kind of early in the morning here. That means early to me. After falling for 44.4 seconds, the time and the barometric triggers started the firing mechanism. So after only close to 45 seconds, the detonation happened at an altitude of 1,968 plus or minus 50 feet, which is about 600 plus or minus 15 meters. While there had been an air raid warning earlier that morning, there was an all clear that had been given since. So people were just going about usual business in the city because they didn't see this coming. Wow. The weapon was aimed at I might get this wrong, Aoi Bridge. I'm not sure how you say that. It's a bridge that was in the city. But because of crosswinds, it landed about 800 feet away from that and detonated right above Shima Surgical Clinic. Because of course it did. The Enola Gay stayed over the target area for 2 minutes and was 16 kilometers, about 10 miles away when the bomb detonated. Only crew members Paul Tibbets, William Parsons, and Thomas Farabee knew of the nature of the weapon. The others on the bomber were only told to expect a blinding flash. They were given protective goggles, so they were like, here, have fun. It was hard to believe what we saw, Tibbets told reporters, and Parsons later said, the whole thing was tremendous and awe-inspiring. Men aboard with me gasped, my God, which I can imagine. Approximately all the people inside the area where the shockwave carried such an overpressure or greater would be killed. At Hiroshima, that area was 2.2 miles or 3.5 kilometers in diameter. Deaths, injuries, and damage came from 3 attributes of the detonation: the blast, the fire, and the radiation. In Hiroshima, almost everything within 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, of the point directly under the explosion was completely destroyed, except for about 50 heavily reinforced earthquake-resistant concrete buildings, only the shells of which remained standing. Most were completely gutted, with their windows, doors, sashes, and frames ripped out. This blast is a result of air heated by X-rays forcing outwards at incredibly high speeds. So there's a shock wave or pressure wave that ripples out in all directions, initially at a velocity greater than the speed of sound. Below, anyone with a view of the outside would have experienced an intense flash of light before a loud booming sound. Some survivors reported that even with their eyes closed and covered with their hands, it was like the sun hit the earth. Then a blast of radiant heat from the erupting 1,200-foot diameter, 370-meter fireball with the heat of approximately 6,000 degrees Celsius, which is about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This is literally hotter than the surface of the sun, or as hot as the surface of the sun, if you will.
That's crazy.
Would rapidly cover over a circular area of 2 miles in diameter, setting the entire city within that space ablaze and vaporizing any living or non-living entity in its path that could not withstand it. Only the concrete buildings to some degree, basically. People nearest to the blast who were outside were just gone. just turned to dust and vapor, basically, leaving behind permanent shadows after absorbing the heat. You can actually still see these shadows there today. And I want to I have one in here. I'm just going to share this one picture because I know how to do that now.
You able to do it from your side?
Yep.
I didn't know that. Oh, look at these.
So I don't know. I'm trying to see if I can.
Oh my God, look at that.
Yeah, I don't know how well everybody else will be able to see it, but these shadows here that look like you can see like a ladder here. There's like looks like a man here.
God, it is a ladder.
Yeah, and there's a person shadow. Looks like right there.
It looks like a shadow, someone's shadow in real time.
Yeah. This darkness on these steps was where someone was sitting. And basically what happens is these people were basically vaporized, and the shadow is there because the light and the heat, all of it just like bleached everything behind them, leaving the shadow of where they were. And these are still there.
Wow. So they've never torn down these things.
No, they're still there. And it gets really sad because there was there's one of these shadows is of a little boy who was playing with marbles at the time, and the shadow was there. He was gone, and the marbles had melted right where he was. So, yeah, lots of craziness. But that is what that is. I wanted to share that because a lot of people are like, "What do you mean shadow?" So yeah, you can actually still see those there today. There's quite a few of them. That which was not vaporized became fuel for the fires that had quickly resulted in this firestorm that carried on after the blast. Fires that erupted afterward from electrical shorts or other household or industrial means merged with those formed by the heated air, dust, and debris, basically pulling in surface air from all around and continuing the destruction and deaths of those trapped in the rubble. Like there was no putting out these fires for a while. Some actually jumped into surrounding rivers to get away from the fires, those who had survived the original blast, and many drowned as a result. Basically, the few people closest to ground zero who were not vaporized or burned to death immediately or soon after were crushed in rubble or killed by the fires and asphyxia from the smoke. Survivors later reported walking around the destruction in a daze, describing the air and sky as dark, as if the sun had disappeared, while also hearing others crying out for help and being able to do little to nothing to help. Charred, unrecognizable bodies of all ages were in the streets, on playgrounds, homes and buildings were gone. Nobody knew where to go or what to do for some time. The fires created by the atomic bomb detonation carried large amounts of ash into the clouds and the atmosphere. 1 to 2 hours after the original explosion, this black rain began to fall. It was like a combination of ash, radioactive fallout, and water. And some of this is what was ever left of those who were vaporized.
Yeah, debris.
So basically causing severe radiation burns and radiation sickness in some cases. So
humans can create hell on Earth.
Oh, yes. And I thought it would be helpful for me to read some actual people's experiences.
I saw that. Is that about to be a movie?
It might already be a movie.
This might be an older. It says James Cameron is about to. The front cover.
I don't know how old this is though, so it might already be a movie. I don't know. I'm not sure, but it's a good book.
Yeah, at the top there says soon to be a major motion picture from James Cameron.
Ghost of Hiroshima, Charles Pellegrino, which makes me think of San Pellegrino, but it's an interesting book. It's not an easy read just from the standpoint of the content, but I like this book too because it tells you like what certain people were doing before and then what they experienced. But there's also a good amount of coincidences, premonition type stuff in here where people woke up and were like, don't go to school. Something bad's going to happen. Like they were like, something basically told them, hey, don't go here. Don't do this. A lot of weird circumstances in that as well that they talk about in here. This girl was actually late for work after earlier air raid siren had gone off. You know, they told, and then they had the all clear and all that. So her schedule was kind of altered, and she was actually supposed to be outside, and she wasn't, which actually probably saved her life because if she was outside, she would likely have died. So she was actually in the manager's office of where she worked, and a voice called excitedly from the courtyard, "It's a B-29 flying up there." So the woman went to the window and saw a commotion in the sky that apparently frightened her. She managed to blurt out fragments of sentences about seeing something like a long, silvery light bulb gleaming in the sunlight and falling really fast, somewhere in the direction of the dome, before she ducked from the window and dived toward the floor, shouting to everyone, "Get down." A plane's engines were droning out there, droning loud as if it might crash. Kimiko is this girl's name, dismissed the get down order as she just another of many false alarms that she had heard lately. So in the final countdown to moment zero, she simply wanted to see the plane that had been causing all the commotion, becoming more distant, less noisy, and doubtless less easy to see with each passing second. A siren started to wail, then went dead, and she never reached the window. The flash was red, Kimiko would record. The same light that occurs the moment you strike a match, but far more intense. In immediate obedience to her air raid training, she covered her eyes and ears and squatted down on the floor. The transition from flash to smoky darkness seemed to have occurred within the same instant, accompanied by the strangest of sensations. In the darkness, I felt as if in a state of weightlessness, with a crackling feeling spreading throughout my body. Not that it was painful, but it was such a bizarre sensation that I thought I must be dying. During these seconds, Kimiko did not notice the bulletproof glass coming apart or that it had itself been transformed into uncountable thousands of little bullets. At least 3 of the speed-slung fragments cut through her left cheek, but people in front of, behind, and beside her were shot dead. There's another one right here that's pretty crazy. This guy was walking, and I think this is the Yamaguchi who also survived Nagasaki. He survived both.
Which is insane. Like, play the lottery, brother.
Yeah.
Because luck is with you.
So this guy was actually, he forgot something back home. They were on their way to this job that they were going to do. And he was like, crap, I got to go get this thing. He's taking a shortcut through a potato field, and a woman dressed in black was nearby that he'd noticed. He noticed 3 parachutes suddenly bloomed overhead. Something like the power of 1,000 flood lamps flashed before his eyes. Responding instantly with his Navy air raid training, Mr. Yamaguchi dove to the ground and rolled into the nearest irrigation ditch, simultaneously protecting his head with his hands. A mile farther from the detonation point than the Morimoto mansion, and even with his ears covered, the sound that came to him was earth-shattering. His eyes were closed, buried in mud, but he could see and feel the glare of the fireball as if the light were shining through the back of his skull and striking his retinas, which in fact it was. He would report later that it seemed as though the sun had fallen to earth and that even the mountains let out a scream. The ground roared and quivered, snapped and leaped, tossing Yamaguchi out of the ditch and some 4 or 5 feet into the air. In later years, he would be unable to tell for certain whether it was the ground shock or the air blast or some convergence of both that had coughed him out of the ditch and made him airborne. His world became confusion and tumult, filled with rushing dust and occasional clearings in the storm, through which he viewed things, irrational things, is what he said. At the very moment he seemed on the verge of falling back again onto the potato field, the fireball imploded over the city and rose at stupendous speed, creating a vacuum effect that for a second or two appeared truly determined to draw the engineer farther from the face of the earth and toward the city, because it's literally pulling everything back into it as it rises. Yeah. But instead, the implosion merely levitated him what would be recalled as an impossibly long time on a cushion of air and thick dust, and he guessed that at no point was he any more than 6 feet above the ground. Through one of the clear air openings in the sea of dust, even as he still drifted over the field, Yamaguchi glimpsed distant rows of houses warping out of shape and flying toward him in pieces. He felt like a mere leaf tossed on a lake of rushing black fog. Then abruptly, he and all the larger pieces of the houses, including the whole rooms full of furniture and mid-flight, dropped to the ground. Smaller pieces continued flying toward the city's center without him, and miraculously, without ever having struck him along the way. After Yamaguchi regained his composure, he realized he'd been dropped into a new ditch, some unknown number of paces from the one in which he had dived. Sitting up and looking around while checking for fractured bones, he beheld a blizzard of burning paper and shreds of smoldering clothing falling out of the sky, flickering like thousands of tiny lanterns and incense burners in the limbs of knocked-down trees and on the leaves of potato plants. It appeared to him that the contents of an entire office building had been hoisted into the heavens, then ripped up, blown apart, scorched, and strewn about. He could not find the sun, or at least not the real sun he had known. The blue sky appeared to have erased, and darkness prevailed, making Yamaguchi feel as if he were in the depths of the ocean. Pieces of buildings were still in flight. I could hear the sound of flying roof tiles shattering in the air. he would write later. Objects falling and the noise of all manner of destruction. It was impossible to identify each noise or its cause. Sitting in a mud pool, Yamaguchi became suddenly aware that one whole side of his body was intensely hot. The exposed skin on his left arm had been literally roasted brownish black, like the skin of an overcooked chicken. Even then, before he knew anything about atomic bombs, the engineer began to suspect that he had just survived a heat ray of some sort, and he realized that his white shirt and his light-colored pants had reflected the rays and spared him much. He had last seen the woman in black, running in fright from the parachutes, running toward the center of the field. Running upright, she had exposed her entire body to the full fury of the flash, while clothed in an all-absorbing equivalent of India ink. Yamaguchi glanced around in every direction, but he never did see a trace of her again. When the noise and the black dust subsided, and Mr. Yamaguchi looked up again, he saw a pillar of fire and ash reaching into the stratosphere. Only much later would he find a way to describe it, like a giant tornado enclosed within a volcanic plume, but the base of it did not move. Only the top of the monster seemed active, growing higher and wider. When this cloud falls to the earth, Yamaguchi told himself, every living thing will die. He realized that even if he survived the cloud, which soon splashed him with oily yellow mist, B-29s might return. Suddenly, all of the burning of his body went away, to be replaced at once by the image of his young wife and child alone at home. He contrived a plan to then find a train or an automobile that was still working, or a horse that was still alive, and by any means necessary, find a way out of Hiroshima and toward home. Home was Nagasaki. So that's, just some of their experiences. There's so many different experiences in this book that are really good. So I was only going to read just a few. With Little Boy, there was no physical bomb crater because it detonated in the air at about 1,900 feet above ground. As a result, there was no specific spread of local radioactive fallout, which would typically result from crater particles being pulled upwards and further downwind. So there was still an airburst, and radiation did affect those closest to ground zero.
You telling me that thing was, 600 meters? What'd you say, 1,500 feet?
What, in the air?
Yeah, it was 1,500 feet in the air when it
1,900.
1,900 feet
above ground,
air when it detonated, and it did all that. I thought they both hit the ground. That's crazy.
And the difference, I think people don't understand the difference here sometimes with why did Chernobyl stay contaminated so long, but Hiroshima was able to be rebuilt and people can live there, that kind of thing, pretty quickly after. And it's because of the detonation in the air. There was a lot more decay happening in those moments, so it didn't stick around like it would have if it were on the ground and it exploded. So
it wasn't in the soil, didn't have a crater. Right.
And so with Chernobyl, that was a ground explosion. It was there, in that building, but still.
It's destroyed the ecosystem.
Yeah. And also the particles are different. There's not as much decay happening in that moment. So the decay takes longer anyway. So that's kind of the basics of it. I mean, but that's just kind of important to realize too, that it doesn't mean that there wasn't radiation there and then. And it doesn't mean that it didn't affect them later in what they ate. And also those who were pregnant at the time, those kinds of things. But we're going to talk about that. But there is a difference. So there, like I said, was still an airburst, and radiation did affect those closest to ground zero. A burst of intense neutron and gamma radiation from the uranium fission reaction caused a lethal zone radius of approximately 1.3 kilometers, 0.8 miles, covering about half of that firestorm area. An estimated 30% of immediate fatalities were people who received lethal doses of this direct radiation but died in the firestorm before their radiation injuries would have even become apparent. Over 6,000 people survived the blast and fire, but died of radiation injuries. Survivor accounts also prominently feature cases of survivors who appeared uninjured, but who would succumb within hours or days to what would later be identified as radiation sickness. So they actually looked okay, but they were not. Also, with the initial airburst, the fission products rose into the stratosphere, where they dissipated and became part of the global environment.
That's great.
How gross for everyone. You're in love. How gross for everyone.
Now, now I mentioned
Secret Life of Pets.
I mentioned that it dropped right over a hospital of sorts, a surgical center. Over 90% of the doctors and 93% of the nurses in Hiroshima were killed or injured. Most had been in the downtown area, which received the greatest damage.
They probably thought that was a necessary evil.
They say they weren't aiming for it, but it still would have done enough damage. Makeshift clinics were set up at what remained of still standing structures for survivors to be treated. However, many actually died there while waiting for care, and their bodies were just in various conditions lying around there as well. So there was just this orbit of bodies that just fell dead while waiting for care as well. Hankawa Elementary School was only 400 meters from ground zero as well. While the school building and basement were constructed with reinforced concrete, all 400 students and 10 teachers were killed. There's stories in this book, too, about children playing hide and seek outside, and they just were never seen again.
Yeah.
All other schools in the city had few survivors, and there were, like I said, children outside in the play areas that were killed or just gone immediately, while others suffered horrible burns and radiation sickness before dying some hours or days later, sometimes weeks later. Children who did survive lost parents and siblings. Some were completely orphaned. Many A-bomb orphans, as they would be known, would be left to roam the streets alone, even later, because the orphanages were already at capacity. So they were just left.
That's awful.
Horrific injuries such as severe burns, missing limbs, deep wounds with organs spilling out affected all ages. Soldiers from a nearby unharmed harbor used motorboats to take those with the best chance of survival down the rivers to the military hospital at Ujina. Estimates also vary on the number of Japanese military personnel killed. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey estimated in 1946 that there were 24,158 soldiers present in Hiroshima at the time of the attack, and that 6,789 were killed or missing as a result. 1970s reconsiderations estimated about 10,000 military dead. And you're going to hear reconsiderations and estimations because, honestly, the record keeping with all this wasn't the greatest, and also any records that were there were destroyed because of this bomb. Now, a modern estimate by the Radiation Effects Research Foundation estimates a city population of 340,000 to 350,000 at the time of the bombing, of which 90,000 to 166,000 died by the end of that year, whether it was immediately or from
half the city
radiation, burns, sickness, things like that, or injuries that they succumbed to. Most of the Japanese 2nd General Army at headquarters there were undergoing physical training on the grounds of Hiroshima Castle, barely 820 meters or 900 yards from the hypocenter, or the impact. Well, not really impact, it didn't impact, but the explosion, right?
Mm-hmm.
The attack killed 3,243 troops on the parade ground. There were 12 airmen that were imprisoned these were U.S. airmen, that were imprisoned at the Chugoku Military Police Headquarters, about 400 meters, 1,300 feet from the center, the hypocenter. Most died instantly, although 2 were reported to have been executed by their captors, and 2 prisoners badly injured by the bombing were left next to the Aoi Bridge by the Kempeitai, where they were stoned to death. So there's that. Just a little what happened there. Among injured survivors in Hiroshima, 30% had radiation injuries from which they recovered, with a lifelong increase in cancer risk. There were major defects to those born to women pregnant at the time of bombing, and who did receive high doses of radiation at the time. Many pregnant.
Pregnant?
Pregnant.
Pregnant?
I'll tell you, pregnant.
Mother of the bride and the baby?
Many pregnant women there had miscarriages or stillbirths as a result as well. Not that this is a subject to laugh at, but if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
No, we're laughing about our collective vocal stems.
Yes. So, but many pregnant women did have miscarriages and stillbirths as a result of all this. There were some survivors who were just in the right place at the right time, or who were protected by some miraculous placement or change in plan. There's a lot of that you can read about. The first report from Hiroshima was sent on a hotline by a 14-year-old female student volunteer communications officer Yoshi Akawa in a bunker at the Chugoku Military District headquarters, which was about a half a mile or 800 meters from the epicenter. She wasn't even believed at first, so she found a soldier above ground who told her that Hiroshima had been attacked by a new type of bomb and that the city was in a state of near total destruction. But like when she called it in, they really didn't believe her at first. So I'll discuss a little more aftermath after we talk about Nagasaki real quick, which wasn't even the primary target of the next bombing. Fat Man was the plutonium implosion type bomb created. This one was tested beforehand, this type at least, at the Trinity test site. Plutonium's not easy to work with, as you can imagine, in terms of shaping and creating, because there's just so many allotropes of plutonium. And so like the element can literally exist in different phases at the same time, depending on temperature and pressure. And it's very delicate. The core consisted of 2 hemispheres with a ring with like this triangular cross-section between them to keep them aligned and prevent jets from forming. As plutonium was found to corrode readily, the sphere was coated with nickel. These hemispheres were just easier to mold plutonium into than a solid sphere. And so it was made also easier by adding gallium. So they kind of had to learn how to do all this. As I mentioned before, the surrounding explosives or triggers would force that implosion. You would have the neutron initiator stuff going on, releasing free neutrons to cause and hasten that fission reaction. There's also a uranium tamper that would reflect free neutrons toward the fissile materials, so would also hasten that chain reaction. Now, the Fat Man bomb destined to hit Nagasaki was fully assembled and wired on tinian. It was then placed inside its bombshell, its ellipsoidal bombshell, which was painted mustard yellow and wheeled out, where it was signed by nearly 60 people. I don't understand the concept of signing weapons of mass destruction.
Who signed it?
Purnell, Brigadier General Thomas F. Farrell, and William Parsons.
They signed the bombs they sent to Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. People who weren't even on the planes that sent those bombs signed those bombs too. Like they were just like, look at me, I'm signing a bomb. Like, oh my God.
Brother.
The acronym JANCFU. I didn't want to, say it because it just seems kind of wrong to say for some reason. It was also written on it because it stands for Joint Army Navy Civilian F up. In case kids are watching, I don't see that F word. Ultimately, the size was limited only by the ability of aircraft to carry it, and it was determined that a B-29 Super Fortress would be both capable and optimal. Now, this limited the bomb to a maximum length of 11 feet, 3.4 meters, a width of 5 feet, which is 1.5 meters, and a weight of 20,000 pounds, which is about 9,100 kilograms. Now, they removed the bomb rails so they could kind of have this maximum width of 5.5 feet. That's how tall I am. That's the width of that thing. Now, on the 7th of August, a day after Hiroshima was destroyed, Yoshio Nishina and other atomic physicists actually arrived at the city of Hiroshima and carefully kind of examined the damage. They went back to Tokyo and they told the cabinet that Hiroshima was indeed destroyed by a nuclear weapon. I told you they didn't believe that girl. So Admiral Somu Toyota, not Toyota like the car, it's Toyota with a D at the end, not a T, but the chief of the Naval General Staff estimated that no more than 1 or 2 additional bombs could be readied. So they decided to endure the remaining attacks, acknowledging, there would be more destruction, but the war would go on. So like the Japanese were fully ready to be like, what else can they do? So these messages were intercepted by U.S. codebreakers. So it was pretty clear that Japan still had no intention of surrendering just yet, at least not without conditions like they wanted. One of the conditions that the emperor wanted was to remain on the throne, to have his power still, Mm-hmm. Now, Nagasaki, like Hiroshima, was a port city, an important trade and industrial area of Japan went on there. The city was situated with a harbor surrounding hillside, which is helpful, which you'll realize in a minute, and contained a population of civilians and military officials with residential, industrial, and commercial structures. Most of these structures were made with traditional materials like timber and plaster and tile. There weren't those, fancy concrete structure, not like it really helped in Hiroshima. Anyway, many homes were simply built adjacent to factory buildings and other homes. There had been this previous evacuation earlier in August when small-scale bombing had destroyed the Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works and a hospital. The Mitsubishi Urakami Torpedo Works was also in this area, which is interesting because this is where some of the torpedoes were made that actually were used in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, this evacuation meant that in Nagasaki, at least, most school children had been sent to rural areas. However, because an earlier all-clear signal had been given, just like it had been in Hiroshima after a raid warning that morning, there were numerous people within the city at the time of the atomic bomb drop. So they weren't They were no longer wary of something about to happen. On the day of the bombing, an estimated 263,000 people were in Nagasaki, including 240,000 Japanese residents, 10,000 Korean residents, and 2,500 conscripted Korean workers. So also 9,000 Japanese soldiers, 600 conscripted Chinese workers, and 400 Allied prisoners of war in a camp to the north of Nagasaki. So there's some demographics for you. 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima, there came a day of good weather. As the following several days were not predicted to be as accommodating, the U.S. military decided to take advantage of this day. Now, at 3:47 a.m. on August 9th, 1945, a B-29 named Boxcar, but it's like box, like a name, Boxcar, but it sounds like Boxcar, piloted by Captain Charles W. Sweeney, lifted off from Tinian and headed toward the primary target, which was supposed to be Kokura Arsenal, which is this massive sort of collection of war industries that was close to the city of Kokura. Now, the mission plan for this second attack was nearly identical to that of the Hiroshima mission. 2 B-29s flying an hour ahead as weather scouts, 2 additional B-29s for instrumentation and photographic support of the mission. However, it had a lot more complications. According to Sweeney's orders, Fat Man was armed about 10 minutes into flight. The plan was to climb to an altitude above this lightning and some minor weather issues that seemed to persist, even though the weather was good. A journalist, William L. Lawrence of the New York Times, was on an escorting aircraft and saw St. Elmo's fire. So like some, I'm not sure, I think it's like static or plasma type stuff. Mm-hmm. They were worried that the static electricity might actually detonate the bomb. Then there was another problem. Sweeney suddenly realized that he was unable to access his reserve fuel due to some malfunction. They had to fly around the south coast of Japan for a good hour because they were waiting on these escorting B-29s, one of which never showed. So there was some problems there. By then, the weather had turned kind of sour over the area, and they really couldn't see the targets below. There was also a lot of smoke over the area after it had drifted from recent fires that were caused by firebombing of the nearby Yahata city the day before. Yahata Steelworks there had also started burning coal tar to produce black smoke for honestly intentional cover after the attacks the previous day. So there was just, their sight was obviously impaired. One crewman reported that Japanese fighters in bursts of anti-aircraft fire were starting to sort of compound the situation. They couldn't find or reach the primary target of Kokura, so they only had enough fuel left to really return to the secondary airfield on Okinawa. So they were like, okay, we're going to make a quick pass and see if we can hit our secondary target, which was the city of Nagasaki. So they weren't even like the primary target. But so a drop was made before their approach with instruments attached to 3 parachutes like that they did in Hiroshima. These instruments also contained an unsigned letter to Ryokichi Sagane, a physicist at the University of Tokyo, who had studied with 3 of the scientists responsible for the atomic bomb at the University of California in Berkeley. This letter urged him to tell the public about the dangers involved with these weapons of mass destruction. It was unsigned. It was likely snuck in there by one of the scientists trying to warn this fellow scientists, you need to tell people about what's about to happen. And I think they found out at least one of the people who wrote that later. Yeah. Cloud cover obscured Nagasaki as well at this time, however, and Sweeney reluctantly approved a much less accurate radar approach on the target. At the last moment, the weapons man, Captain Kermit the Frog here, Kermit Behan, caught a brief glimpse of the city's stadium through the clouds and dropped the bomb. Like literally was like, oh, there it is, drop. Now the boxcar plane then made it to Okinawa, where it crash landed as the engines failed, but the crew was okay. So a lot of problems went with this go round. At 11:02 a.m., at an altitude of 1,650 feet, Fat Man exploded over the city with a yield of an estimated 21 kilotons of TNT. This is 40% more powerful than the little boy. Now, interestingly, though, Hiroshima suffered more damage than Nagasaki did. And we're going to cover why in literally just a second. The radius of total destruction was about 1.6 kilometers, about a mile, followed by fires across the northern portion of the city to 3.2 kilometers, about 2 miles south of the bomb. The torpedo works was destroyed, as were other factories. The bombing badly damaged the city's medical facilities. A makeshift hospital was established at the Shinkozen Primary School, which served as the main medical center. Surviving but injured doctors and nurses treated who they could there. Trains kept running and were evacuating many victims to hospitals in nearby towns as well. While fires resulted from the blast, they did not spread or grow into a firestorm like what had happened with Hiroshima, mainly because there just wasn't enough of a fuel source to drive them like there had been in the other city. Now, if it had been further south, where there were more industrial type stuff, there would have been more fuel and it would have been worse. Now, while this bomb was stronger and more efficient than Little Boy, the damage done to Nagasaki, as I mentioned, was less than that done to Hiroshima. This is mainly due to the area of the drop. The hills and surrounding mountains of Nagasaki acted as this sort of natural barrier that contained the Fat Man's bomb's blast. So it limited its maximum destruction to that narrow valley, the Urakami Valley. And so it protected surrounding residential areas. It was also dropped where, like I said, there was little fuel for fires to spread. So now, had the drop, as I mentioned, been further in town or downtown, that damage would have been much greater. This doesn't mean it did little damage either, though. It just did less than Hiroshima. Everything within a mile of ground zero was annihilated. 14,000 homes burst into flames. People close to the blast were vaporized. Those unlucky enough to be just outside that radius received horrific burns, and there and further out, radiation poisoning that would eventually kill many of them. Although estimates vary, perhaps 40,000 people were killed by the initial detonation. By the beginning of 1946, 30,000 more people were dead. And within the next 5 years, well over 100,000 deaths were directly attributable to the bombing of Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. A U.S. Navy officer who visited the city in mid-September, like the month later, reported that even over a month after the attack, a smell of death and corruption pervades the place. The explosion did generate a windstorm several kilometers wide that carried ash, dust, and debris over the mountain ranges surrounding Nagasaki. Approximately 20 minutes after the bombing, a black rain fell with the consistency of mud or oil. The rain carried radioactive material and continued for 1 to 2 hours. So an estimated 35,000 to 40,000 people were killed outright by the bombing at Nagasaki. These were mainly those working in munitions and industrial areas at the time. Of 7,500 Japanese employees who worked inside the Mitsubishi munitions plant, including mobilized students, like I mentioned earlier, ones who were just kind of helping, but they were still students, and regular workers. 6,200 were killed. Some 17,000 to 22,000 others who worked in other war plants and factories in the city died as well. Still many others died later from related blast and burn injuries, and hundreds more from radiation illnesses from exposure to the bomb's initial radiation. The Urakami Cathedral was located close to the hypocenter and completely destroyed. At the time, it was crowded with worshippers for confession as the Feast of Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary was approaching on 15th of August. All of them were killed. Another site with mass casualties was the Nagasaki Medical University, where the school building and facilities were destroyed by the atomic bomb. Over 850 people, including faculty, staff, students, and nurses, were killed. Unlike Hiroshima's military death toll, only 150 Japanese soldiers were killed instantly. At least 8 Allied prisoners of war, British Royal Air Force Corporal Ronald Shaw, and 7 Dutch prisoners of war were killed, and as many as 13 may have died. American prisoner of war Joe Kiyomiya survived, reportedly having been shielded from the effects of the bomb by the concrete walls of his cell. The 24 Australian prisoners of war in Nagasaki survived. A total of 60,000 to 80,000 plus fatalities resulted, including from long-term health effects, the strongest of which was leukemia, with an attributable risk of 46% for bomb victims. So after meetings and arguments over the matter, Emperor Hirohito made the decision to surrender to the UN's conditions so long as he was allowed, again, to retain his leadership position. He wanted to keep the throne, Had he not discussed this surrender, though, there were actually more plans for further atomic bombing, but it was not likely that Truman would have given another bombing order, as he shared his feelings on the matter at the next cabinet meeting. And basically, paraphrased, Truman basically said, There will be no further dropping of the atomic bomb. Henry A. Wallace recorded in his diary that Truman said that he had given orders to stop atomic bombing. He said the thought of wiping out another 100,000 people was too horrific. He didn't like the idea of killing, as he said, all those kids. 3 weeks after the bombings, Tibbets, one of the people that was on the mission, decided to visit Hiroshima with some of his team. He actually landed at Nagasaki instead, as Hiroshima's airfield was still unusable. They arrived before any American troops and drove into the city, which they found eerie. They were amazed at all the destruction from just one bomb. And in his words, it scares the hell out of you. As America occupied Japan, journalists also started visiting Hiroshima and Nagasaki to document the effects of atomic weapons. It was observed that large numbers of survivors continued to die from what would later become recognized as radiation poisoning. On August 31st, the New York Times published an abbreviated version of this dude's article, and nearly all references to uranium poisoning were omitted, though, for whatever reason. An editor's note was added to say, according to the American scientists, the atomic bomb will not have any lingering after effects. Another journalist, Wilfred Burchett, also noted that people were dying horribly after bleeding from orifices, and their flesh would rot away from the injection holes where vitamin A was administered to no avail. And this was how the public was basically informed for the first time of the gruesome effects of radiation and nuclear fallout. The radiation burns, the radiation poisoning, which would sometimes last more than 30 days after the blast. And photographers who were there at the time of the bombings also captured detailed photos of the immediate after effects. Many of these were confiscated by American soldiers. The New York Times then apparently reversed course on that one story they ran, and actually ran a front page story confirming the existence of a terrifying affliction in Hiroshima, where many had symptoms such as hair loss and vomiting blood before dying. General MacArthur, the dude that had been leading the occupation of Japan, was not happy with such bad PR, as he termed it, and kicked some journalists out entirely. He's kind of a jerk. An estimated 90,000 to 166,000 people in Hiroshima, between 26 and 49% of its population, and 60,000 to 80,000 people in Nagasaki, between 22 and 32% of its population, died in 1945. Of which a majority in each case were killed on the days of the bombings due to the force and heat of the blast themselves. Nearly all of the remainder of victims died within 2 to 4 months due to radiation exposure and resulting complication. So cancer resulting from radiation exposure doesn't show up immediately, as we know. Instead, radiation-induced cancer has a latency period of like 5 years and above. Leukemia, normally about 2 years and above, peaking around 6 to 8 years later. In 2018, the first major reports on significant increased incidence of the leukemia among survivors were published. Almost all cases of leukemia over the following 50 years were in people exposed to more than 1 gray of radiation. In the 1987 lifespan study conducted by the Radiation Effects Research Foundation, a statistical excess of 507 cancers of undefined lethality were observed in 79,972 hibakusha. That's like the term they use for people who have been affected by the blast, basically. And that's those who had actually took part in the study, at least between 1958 and 1987. As the studies continued, there were estimates that from 1950 to 2000, 46% of leukemia deaths, which also include Sadako Sasaki. This was a girl who was only 2 years old when she survived, but was severely irradiated. She was 2 years old when the bomb hit Hiroshima, and she died while still in school of leukemia, along with a lot of her classmates. So there were a lot of people coming down with leukemia, including kids. Now, as of March 31st, 2025, 99,130 of these survivors were still alive, mostly in Japan. The government of Japan recognizes about 1% of these as having illnesses caused by radiation. Many of them face various levels of discrimination due to public ignorance and concern that they carry some hereditary or even contagious disease, which is obviously not true. There has not been any evidence of children of later pregnancies having any genetic anomalies due to their parents' previous radiation. That's the one. Those are people who were born of pregnancies after.
Y'all, our dog will not shut up. She's right outside the door, crying like a banshee.
So, yeah, those born of later pregnancies, not who were mothers who were pregnant when it happened, but later, there haven't been any genetic anomalies according to statistical methods. There are memorials in Hiroshima and Nagasaki that contain the names of those survivors who were known to have died since the bombings. It's updated annually on the anniversaries of the bombings. So there's quite a few numbers in there. Now, perhaps as many as 200 people from Hiroshima sought refuge in Nagasaki after the atomic bomb there. So, which means they also experienced the bombing of Nagasaki days later. A total of 165 of these survived Nagasaki also, with 9 claiming to have been close to the blast zone at the time. One such survivor of both was Mr. Yamaguchi, who I mentioned earlier. He was confirmed to have been 3 kilometers or 1.9 miles from ground zero in Hiroshima on a business trip when the bomb was detonated. He was seriously burnt on his left side, spent the night in Hiroshima. He arrived at his home city of Nagasaki on the 8th of August, the day before the bombing, and he was exposed to residual radiation while searching for his relatives. He was the first officially recognized survivor of both bombings, and he actually died in 2010 of stomach cancer. So just for recognition here, about 5,000 to 8,000 Koreans there as forced laborers typically were killed in Hiroshima, and 1,500 to 2,000 in Nagasaki. According to the South Korea Atomic Bomb Victims Association, about 70,000 Koreans were exposed to the bomb. By the end of 1945, 40,000, so 57% had died. The overall rate was about 33.7%. And according to one study, some survivors were forced to clear rubble and recover bodies, which were all radioactive at that time. Like they were made to do that. Koreans without local ties remained in the city, exposed to the radioactive fallout and with limited access to medical care, while Japanese evacuees fled to relatives. So Korean survivors did have a difficult time fighting for the same recognition as survivors and to actually get, free health benefits that they deserved. It was only by 2008 that some of these issues were dealt with, and only through lawsuits. So, both cities were rebuilt after the war. They look pretty amazing now, actually. There are museums and memorials in both areas, of course. There has since been this ongoing debate about America's use of the atomic bombs, in 1945. Mm-hmm. In 2015, a Pew Research Center survey found that 56% of Americans believe that the bombings were justified. In Japan, only 14% agree the bombs were justified. Among Americans...
You don't say.
Among Americans, the generation...
Breaking news, everyone.
The generation gap remains pronounced, so 70% of respondents over the age of 65, but only 47% of those aged 18 to 29 agree that the bombings were justified. So it's mostly older people. Mm-hmm. News of the atomic bombing was greeted quite positively in the U.S. just after it happened. There was a poll in Fortune magazine in late 1945 that showed a significant minority of Americans, a good 23%, actually wished that more atomic bombs could be dropped on Japan. Like that was... So many of the physicists who worked on the Manhattan Project or who had a role in the discovery of fission and thus atomic energy or atomic weapons were actually critics of the bombings. Some expressed serious regret for having had any role in the matter. Leo Szilard, for instance, put it this way when asked if the bombings were considered a war crime. Let me say only this much to the moral issue involved. Suppose Germany had developed 2 bombs before we had any bombs, and suppose Germany had dropped one bomb, say on Rochester and the other on Buffalo, and then having run out of bombs, she would have lost the war. Can anyone doubt that we would then have defined the dropping of atomic bombs on cities as a war crime? And that we would have sentenced the Germans who were guilty of this crime to death at Nuremberg and hanged them?
There you go.
Albert Einstein and Eugene Wigner also expressed their dismay over the use of the atomic weapons. The British had captured and detained several German scientists to learn about their weapons programs, usually by bugging their rooms and listening to their conversations. And you can actually go and look at the transcripts from this, and it's actually some of it's kind of funny. Because they're like, no, they don't know how to bug us. They don't know anything. But in these conversations, Otto Hahn, who was the German chemist and co-discoverer of fission itself, expressed his gratefulness that the German project had not succeeded in developing such an inhumane weapon. It's not saying that Germany hadn't done inhumane things already. And he also said sometime later, once I wanted to suggest that all uranium should be sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Werner Heisenberg, which should be a familiar name, did not believe the news at first. Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker said, "I think it's dreadful of the Americans to have done it. I think it's madness on their part." But Heisenberg replied, "One could equally well say that's the quickest way to ending a war." So, yeah, that was some of the Germans' takes on it, but they were also involved in their own study of atomic weapons. This is when they were captured by the Brits and sort of put in a room and bugged to see what they would say. They were trying to see if they could get some info from them, I guess. But even Oppenheimer looked back on the issue with remorse and regrets. But that is Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the bombings. And this book is really good for reference. It's got a lot of survivor stories in it and just their experiences. It's very well written. It's got some dramatic language in it. I've noticed it's, as I read those parts, you probably realize it's very expanded language-wise, but it gives a pretty good, I think, image of what those people experienced.
Gotcha. So. All right. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. That's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye-bye.